The knock came first, then Cole's voice low final, the kind of voice men use when they've already decided. I want you out. Tonight. Danielle Hayes stood in the doorway of the home she had never once raised her voice in. Rain fell behind her in sheets. She was still holding her phone when the door clicked shut. She looked down at the screen. One email. From Patricia. Wire confirmed. $30,000 00000 received. Congratulations, Danielle. She didn't cry. She didn't knock. She didn't call his name. She stepped off the porch into the rain and walked. He had thrown out the wrong woman, and he had done it on the worst possible night of his life. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you, drop your country and the time where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know who's out there with me tonight. And if this story is worth your time, hit that subscribe button and stay. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about this woman. Cole Whitfield had a theory about success. It wasn't about how hard you worked. It wasn't about what you built or what you sacrificed or how many mornings you dragged yourself out of bed before the sun came up. No. Cole believed deeply, almost religiously, that success was about appearance. The right suit, the right car, the right table at the right restaurant, and most importantly, the right woman standing beside you when the people who mattered were watching. Danielle was not that woman. Not in his eyes. She was too quiet at dinner parties, too unbothered when someone ignored her, too comfortable in flat shoes when every other wife in the room wore heels. She laughed too easily at things Cole didn't find funny, and she never not once seemed to care what anyone in that room thought of her. It drove him absolutely insane. The first time Cole felt it, that specific hot-faced shame, was 14 months into their marriage. A company gala. The Meridian Hotel downtown, 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city like a crown. Cole had been angling for a VP promotion for months, and his director, a sharp-shouldered man named Gerald Brooks, was going to be there with his wife. Cole had spent 2 weeks planning what he would wear. He had not thought once about what Danielle would wear. She came downstairs in a deep burgundy wrap dress, modest, well-fitted, simple gold earrings. She looked beautiful. Cole looked at her and felt something he could not name, something between disappointment and irritation, and said nothing. At the gala, Gerald Brooks extended his hand toward Danielle with a wide smile. And this must be your wife. Cole talks about you constantly. He didn't. He never had. Danielle, she said, shaking Gerald's hand with a steadiness that made Cole inexplicably uncomfortable. It's lovely to meet you. Gerald's wife leaned in. What do you do, Danielle? There was the briefest pause, so brief Cole almost missed it. Danielle smiled and said, consulting, private sector. Oh, how interesting. Which firms? Mostly my own, Danielle said, and then smoothly redirected the conversation toward Gerald's wife, asking about a charity initiative the woman had mentioned in passing, and within 3 minutes the two of them were deep in a conversation that Cole and Gerald were not part of. Cole stood there with a glass of champagne he didn't taste and a feeling he couldn't shake. On the drive home, he said nothing for 11 minutes. Then, you could have dressed up a little more. Danielle looked out the window. I thought I looked nice. You looked fine, he said. Fine isn't the same as good, Danielle. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She turned back to the window and watched the city lights blur past, and the silence between them settled like something permanent. That was the beginning of it, or maybe it was just the beginning of Cole being honest about something that had always been there. Vivian Whitfield arrived in their lives the way she always did, announced by a phone call followed immediately by her self-suitcase, already in the entryway before anyone had agreed she should come. Cole's mother was a woman who had raised her son to believe he was exceptional. Not in the way mothers do when they're simply being kind, but in the way that leaves a mark, the way that makes a man genuinely unable to comprehend that the world might not see him the same way she did. She had not approved of Danielle from the beginning. She's quiet, Vivian had said to Cole the first Thanksgiving low enough that she presumably thought Danielle couldn't hear from the kitchen. Quiet women are hiding something. She arrived that April weekend under the pretense of a visit. She reorganized Danielle's kitchen on the first morning without asking. She made a comment about the curtains. She sat across from Danielle at lunch and said with the warmth of a woman who had rehearsed the sentence, You know, Cole works so hard. A man like him needs a partner who can really elevate him. Socially, professionally. A pause. You understand what I mean? Danielle looked at her mother-in-law across the table. I understand exactly what you mean, Vivian, she said, and then she picked up her fork and continued eating. Vivian blinked. She had expected tears or defensiveness, or at least the small victory of visible hurt. She got none of those things. And somehow that was worse. That evening, Cole sat with his mother on the back porch, and she said it plainly. A man like Cole deserves a woman who lifts him up, not one who drags him down just by walking into a room. Cole didn't disagree. He never disagreed with his mother about Danielle. That was the second thing that mattered. Tara came later. Cole would never admit exactly when, not to a lawyer, not to a friend, not even to himself in the specific way that required honesty. But the signs were never particularly hidden. A second phone kept face down on his nightstand. Late meetings that ended at restaurants with no colleagues present. A laugh he used on calls in the hallway that he had not used with Danielle in over a year. She was 29. She worked at a marketing firm that did occasional business with Cole's company. She was everything Vivian had implied. Danielle should be socially enthusiastic, visibly admiring of Cole, in rooms full of people quick to laugh at his jokes, quick to agree with his opinions. Tara believed Cole was wealthy. She believed Danielle was a burden. She believed because Cole had told her in those late evening conversations that blurred the line between confession and seduction, that once the divorce was done, everything would fall into place. She believed a great many things that were not true. What Cole never thought to ask in 3 years of marriage was a simple question. What does your company actually do? He knew the name, DH Capital Group. He had seen the letterhead on documents that passed across the kitchen counter before Danielle slid them into her leather portfolio and excused herself to her office. He knew she had meetings, early ones sometimes, before dawn, sometimes on weekends. He knew she traveled occasionally and always came back composed and said little about where she'd been. He had decided in the casual and permanent way of a man who isn't paying attention that it was small work. Consulting, she'd said. Small firms, small clients, modest fees. The kind of work a woman like Danielle would do, careful, quiet, unremarkable. He never searched the company name. He never asked Patricia Wells, who called the house twice a year and whom Cole vaguely knew as Danielle's lawyer, what exactly she was retained for. He never opened the filing cabinet in Danielle's office, even once, even out of idle curiosity. He looked at his wife and he saw what he had decided to see, and that decision was already quietly the beginning of everything he was about to lose. The night he came home smelling of a perfume that wasn't Danielle's, she was sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea gone cold. She watched him come through the door. She watched him register that she was there, and she watched the fraction of a second in which he recalibrated his expression. She said nothing. She picked up her cup, walked to the sink, poured it out, and went to bed. But she had seen it. She had filed it away in the same careful, quiet manner. She filed everything not with anger, not with tears, but with the particular precision of a woman who had spent 10 years learning that the most powerful thing you can do with information is know exactly when to use it. She was not ready yet, but she was getting close. The alarm never woke Danielle Hayes. She was always already awake. 4:53 in the morning. The bedroom, dark Cole's breathing slow and even beside her. She would lie still for exactly 2 minutes, not from hesitation, not from reluctance, but because she had learned long ago that the 2 minutes between sleeping and rising were the clearest thinking she would do all day. No noise, no obligations, just her own mind turning over problems the way a river turns over stones, smoothly, continuously, without drama. Then she would rise, quietly, the way she did everything. She would make coffee in the kitchen with the overhead light off, just the small lamp above the stove, and she would sit at the corner of the counter with her laptop open and her leather portfolio beside her, and she would begin. Cole had never once woken up early enough to see this. He left for work at 8:15, never earlier, always with the particular energy of a man who believed that arriving at an office in a good suit was its own form of productivity. By the time he came downstairs, Danielle had already been working for 3 hours. She had already read the overnight reports from her team in Tokyo. She had already responded to 14 emails, reviewed 2 contracts, and made 1 phone call to a fund manager in Zurich, whose time zone made 5 a.m. the only reasonable hour. She closed the laptop when she heard his footsteps on the stairs. She put the portfolio in her bag. She poured him a coffee without being asked because she was not performing domesticity. She simply did not want questions she wasn't ready to answer yet. "Morning," Cole would say, not looking up from his phone. "Morning," she would say back, and that was usually the whole of it. Danielle had started DH Capital Group at 24 years old, 8 months after her father died. Her father, Raymond Hayes, had been a man of extraordinary quiet intelligence, the kind of man who read 3 newspapers a day and said very little, who had built a modest but rock-solid import business over 30 years and left behind, along with a small house in the suburbs and a garden that needed tending, a holding company registered in Delaware, and a portfolio of investments that most people in his life had no idea existed. Danielle had known. She was the one who sat with him at the kitchen table on Sunday evenings while he reviewed his statements. She was 14 the first time he explained to her what compounding interest actually meant. Not the textbook version, but the real version, the patient version, the version that requires you to do almost nothing for a very long time and trust that the math will do the work. The hardest part, he had told her sliding a printed page across the table, is that it looks like nothing is happening. For years it looks like nothing, and then one morning you wake up and it's everything. She had never forgotten that. When he died a Tuesday in October, a heart that had simply decided it was done, he left her the house, the garden, and the holding company. The investments inside it had grown over 30 years of Raymond Hayes' patient invisible work to just under $4 million. Danielle was 24. She had a finance degree. She had paid for herself a job at an asset management firm that she was already out thinking, and a grief so clean and deep it had reorganized something fundamental in her. She quit the job 6 weeks after the funeral. She registered DH Capital Group as a subsidiary of her father's holding company. She wrote her first investment thesis at the kitchen table of his house under the same lamp he had used, and she sent it to 7 people. 3 responded. That was enough. The early years were not dramatic. They were not the kind of story people told at galas. There was no single eureka moment, no enormous risk that paid off spectacularly overnight. There was just Danielle working consistently, methodically, without fanfare in sectors that most investors her age found either too slow or too technical. Biotechnology, renewable energy infrastructure, water purification systems in emerging markets. Things that mattered on a scale most people couldn't hold in their heads comfortably. She had a gift not for predicting the future exactly, but for reading the present with unusual clarity. She could look at a technology company in its second year of operation and understand from the structure of its leadership and the specificity of its patents whether it would be relevant in 15 years. She was wrong sometimes, but she was right far more often than the models suggested she should be. By the time she was 29, DH Capital was managing $200 million in assets. By 31, it was $4 billion. By the time she met Cole Whitfield at a mutual friend's dinner party, shook his hand across a table of people who would later not remember being there, and smiled at something he said that she found mildly amusing but not particularly original. By that time, DH Capital Group was quietly, unfussily approaching the threshold of something that would eventually require a press release. She had not told him any of this, not because she was ashamed, not because she didn't trust him exactly, not yet, at least, but because there is a particular thing that happens when men learn a woman has more money than them, and Danielle had watched it happen enough times to know she wanted to see who Cole Whitfield was before he had that information to arrange himself around. She had watched. She had learned. She had, in the end, learned enough. The Tokyo deal had been 3 years in the making. Haruki Global, a Japanese-Korean energy and biotech conglomerate with holdings across 14 countries, had first approached DH Capital through an intermediary in the spring of Cole and Danielle's first year of marriage. The interest was acquisition. Haruki wanted DH Capital's portfolio, its proprietary technology investments, and most importantly, its founder's strategic framework, which had become something of a quiet legend in certain rooms Danielle occupied and Cole did not. The negotiations had moved slowly, carefully, the way negotiations of that size always do. There were months of due diligence, there were counter-proposals and revised valuations, and one very difficult quarter in which Danielle had considered walking away entirely and had called Patricia Wells at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night and said plainly, "Tell me if I'm being an idiot." Patricia had paused for exactly 4 seconds. "You're not being an idiot. You're being careful. There's a difference. Hold the line." She had held the line. The final number $30 billion USD wire transfer upon signing had been agreed upon on a Friday morning. The formal signing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The following Tuesday was the day Cole told her to pack a bag. The signing happened remotely that evening at 9:47 p.m., while rain hammered the window of a hotel room Danielle had checked into 40 minutes after being put out of her own home. She sat at the small desk in her good coat, still damp at the shoulders, and she signed her name on the final page of a document that Patricia had already countersigned. Her phone vibrated once. Patricia's message wire confirmed. $30,000 00000 received. Congratulations, Danielle. She set the phone face down on the desk. She sat in the quiet of the hotel room, and she breathed slowly in and out, and she thought about her father at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, sliding a printed page across the wood. One morning you wake up and it's everything. She picked the phone back up. She looked at the confirmation number for a long time. Then she ordered room service, took off her damp coat, and went to work. He had no idea, and she had decided not yet. The text message was not hidden. That was the thing Danielle would think about later, not with bitterness, but with a kind of clinical interest in what it revealed about Cole's state of mind. A man who is careful hides things. A man who has stopped caring leaves his phone face up on the kitchen counter while he showers with the screen still lit, with a message from a contact saved simply as T that reads, "Last night was everything. When are you telling her?" Danielle had not been looking. She had been reaching past the phone for her coffee mug. She read the message once. She set the mug down. She read it again. Then she picked up her coffee, walked to the window, and stood there looking at the garden her father had planted. Transplanted now to the backyard of the house she and Cole had bought together, the hydrangeas she had dug up herself and carried in the back of a rental truck because she could not leave them behind, and she stood there until she heard the shower turn off. By the time Cole came downstairs, the phone was exactly where he had left it, and Danielle was at the table with her laptop open and her face arranged into the particular expression of a woman doing ordinary work on an ordinary morning. She did not say anything. She filed it away instead. Precisely. Permanently. She had suspected, of course. There is a specific texture to a marriage that is being quietly abandoned, a withdrawal so gradual it almost convinces you it isn't happening, the way a tide goes out. So slowly you don't notice until you're standing on wet sand, wondering where the water went. Cole had been withdrawing for months. The late evenings, the second phone, the way he had stopped touching her shoulder when he passed behind her chair, a habit so small she hadn't consciously registered it until it was gone. But suspicion is not knowledge. And Danielle Hayes had always been precise about the difference. Now she knew. She did not cry. She did not confront him. She opened a new document on her laptop and she typed a single line at the top of a blank page, a habit she had developed in her early years at DH Capital, when she needed to separate what she felt from what she needed to do. The line read, "What do I actually need here?" She stared at it for a while. Then she closed the laptop and called Patricia Wells. The afternoon Vivian Whitfield invited Tara Simmons into their home. She did it with the particular confidence of a woman who had decided the outcome of a situation and was simply stage managing the final scenes. Danielle came home from a meeting, a real meeting, a 4-hour session with her lead analyst, reviewing the final Haruki integration timeline, though Cole's mother would never know or care about that, to find 2 cars in the driveway she didn't recognize. She stood in the entryway and listened. Laughter from the living room. Vivian's voice, and beneath it younger, warmer, in a way that was clearly performed, a voice she had never heard before. She walked in. Vivian was seated in the armchair she always claimed as hers when she visited. Across from her, on the sofa, sat a young woman in a red dress. Slim, carefully assembled. The kind of woman who had thought about exactly how she would look in this room in this moment if this moment ever came. Tara Simmons looked up when Danielle entered. Something moved across her face, not guilt exactly. More like the expression of a chess player recalculating after an unexpected move. "Danielle?" Vivian said with the warmth of someone who had rehearsed warmth. "You're home early. This is Tara. She's a friend of Cole's from work. She was just passing through the neighborhood and I said she simply had to come in." Nobody passed through this neighborhood. It was a 40-minute drive from downtown. Danielle looked at Tara. Tara looked at Danielle. "It's nice to meet you," Danielle said. She meant it in a way Tara would only understand much later. She went upstairs, changed her clothes, came back down, made tea for 3 without being asked, and sat with them for 22 minutes while Vivian talked about a renovation she was considering, and Tara laughed at things that were not particularly funny. Danielle contributed 2 sentences to the conversation, both polite, both unreadable. When Tara left, Vivian watched the door close and then turned to Danielle with an expression that was almost triumphant. Danielle smiled at her mother-in-law. "More tea, Vivian." Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, accepted the tea. Cole came home that evening at 7:43. Vivian had stayed for dinner. She had Danielle notice set the table for 3 without asking the particular assumption of a woman who had decided she was already winning. Dinner was quiet in the particular way of meals where too much is unsaid. Cole was different in his mother's presence, not better, not warmer, but more himself in the way that people become more themselves when they have an audience that affirms them. He sat at the head of the table and talked about his week with an expansiveness he never showed when it was just the 2 of them. Vivian laughed at his observations. Danielle passed the bread. After Vivian left, Cole stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Danielle in a way he had not looked at her in months. Not with warmth, with something closer to assessment. "We need to talk," he said. "All right," she said. He sat down. He put both hands flat on the counter the way men do when they want to appear reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "I don't think this is working," he said. "Us. I don't think it's been working for a long time." Danielle waited. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, "about what I need, about what I deserve, and I think we both know that we want different things." She noticed he had not said what she deserved, only what he did. "I want a divorce," he said. He said it the way people say things they have practiced cleanly, with a finality that is meant to signal that discussion is not on the table. "I've already spoken to someone, a lawyer. I think it's the right thing for both of us." He had spoken to a lawyer before he had spoken to her. She looked at him for a long moment, at his hands flat on the counter, at the particular set of his jaw that she had once found handsome and now found simply familiar, the way you find a piece of furniture, familiar, present, unremarkable, soon to be rearranged. "Are you sure?" she said. Her voice was even, quiet. The voice of a woman asking a question she already knows the answer to. Cole straightened slightly, as though he had expected more resistance and was recalibrating for the absence of it. "Absolutely," he said. The word came out with a confidence that almost disguised how much he had needed to say it. He did not ask her how she felt. He did not ask if she had anything she wanted to say. He stood up from the counter, rolled his sleeves down, and said he was going to bed early. Danielle sat at the kitchen counter after he left. The house was very quiet. She listened to his footsteps on the stairs, 1, 2, 3, and she sat with the silence that followed until it settled into something almost comfortable. Then she opened her laptop. She had 3 emails from Patricia she hadn't responded to, yet a revised closing document from Haruki's legal team, and a calendar reminder for a call tomorrow morning at 5:45. She pulled the laptop toward her and began. He had just made the decision for her, and he had no idea what he had just set in motion. The volley was small. That was the first thing Danielle noticed when Cole set it at the bottom of the stairs, a carry-on black, the kind she used for overnight trips. Not the large suitcase from the top shelf of the closet. Not a box, a carry-on. As though he had decided the sum total of what she was entitled to take from 3 years of a shared life was whatever could fit in 22 inches of hard-shell luggage. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Cole. He was standing in the living room with his arms crossed and his jaw set, wearing the navy suit he wore when he wanted to feel authoritative. Vivian was beside him. She had arrived an hour earlier without announcement, which told Danielle that this evening had been planned in advance, that her mother-in-law had been called in specifically for this, the way you call in a witness when you want someone to confirm the version of events you intend to tell later. "I think it's better if you go tonight," Cole said. "I've thought about it. I think a clean break is better for everyone." Danielle looked at the valley again. "Tonight?" she said. Not a question. A repetition, the way you repeat something back to someone when you want to be absolutely certain you have heard it correctly. "The longer you stay, the harder it gets." Vivian offered from beside her son in the tone of a woman who had told herself she was being merciful. "It's better this way, Danielle. For everyone. For everyone." As though Danielle's removal from her own home was a kindness being done on her behalf. She looked at Vivienne, she looked at Cole. She looked at the small black carry-on at the bottom of the stairs, packed with items she had not chosen, assembled by someone who had touched her belongings without her permission and decided what she needed and what she didn't. She picked up the valley. She walked to the entryway. She took her coat from the hook by the door, the long camel coat, the one her father had given her the Christmas before he died, the one she kept because the lining still smelled faintly of his house on cold days, if she buried her face in the collar. She put it on. She picked up her leather portfolio from the entryway table. She put the strap over her shoulder. She did not look around the room. She did not look at the hydrangeas she could see through the back window, pale and blue and entirely hers, in a way this house never quite had been. She did not look at Cole. She opened the front door. The rain came in immediately cold, driving the kind of October rain that has no patience and no mercy, that soaks through a coat in under a minute and finds the back of your neck and the spaces between your fingers regardless of how you hold yourself against it. Cole said nothing. Vivian said nothing. The door closed behind her. She stood on the front porch for exactly 4 seconds, not because she was hesitating, not because she was hoping the door would open again, but because the rain was very loud and she needed to orient herself to locate the physical fact of where she was and what she was doing and what happened next. It was a habit she had developed in difficult negotiations. When the ground shifted, stand still for 4 seconds before you move. Let the situation become real before you respond to it. 4 seconds. Then she stepped off the porch. The rain hit her immediately fully without apology. The camel coat darkened at the shoulders. The volley wheels caught on the uneven edge of the front path, and she steadied them without breaking her stride. She walked to the end of the driveway and she stood on the pavement and she took out her phone to call a car. The screen was wet. She wiped it against the inside of her lapel. There was a notification she hadn't opened. An email from Patricia Wells. Sent at 9:31 p.m. 12 minutes ago, while Danielle had been standing in the entryway putting on her coat. She opened it. The subject line read, "Closing Haruki, Global/DH Capital, confirmed." She stood in the rain on the pavement outside the house Cole had just put her out of, and she read the email. Danielle wire transfer completed and confirmed per the closing documents executed this evening. Final amount $30,000, 000000 US dollars, received in full to DH Capital Group primary account. All documentation filed. Congratulations. Call me when you can. P. $30 billion. Wired to her account. Tonight. She read it twice. The rain came down on her phone screen and she tilted it slightly to read through the water, and she read it a second time to make sure the number was what she thought it was. 30 zeros arranged behind a 3. A number so large it stopped feeling like money and started feeling like something else, like a door swinging open onto a hallway she had been walking toward for 10 years. She lowered the phone. She looked up at the house. The living room light was on. She could see the outline of Cole's shadow moving behind the curtain, already moving, already rearranging, already beginning the version of the night that didn't include her. She felt something move through her. Not triumph. Not yet. Something quieter and more fundamental, the particular stillness of a person who has just watched the last variable in a very long equation resolve itself. She looked back down at her phone. She called a car. 2 minutes, the app said. A white sedan. She stood in the rain and she waited, and she did not move back toward the porch, and she did not look at the house again. She looked at the garden, the small section visible from the street, the edge of the hydrangeas just visible past the fence, and she thought about her father. She thought about him sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening with a lamp on and a cup of tea gone cold and a printed page he had slid across the table toward her. One morning you wake up and it's everything. The white sedan turned onto the street. The driver was a man in his 50s, unhurried, with a sports radio station on low and a cardboard air freshener shaped like a pine tree swinging from the rearview mirror. He glanced at her in the mirror as she settled into the back seat. The wet coat, the small volley, the portfolio, she held on her lap like it was the only thing she had been sure to keep. He said nothing for 3 blocks. Then, mildly, without particular curiosity, "Rough night." Danielle looked down at her phone, at the email still open on the screen. At the confirmation number below Patricia's signature, a string of digits that represented the largest single financial transaction she had ever completed executed tonight in the rain, while her husband was watching the living room curtain fall back into place. "No," she said. Her voice was steady, quiet. The voice of a woman who has just completed something enormous and has not yet decided how to feel about it and is content for now to simply let it be true. She looked out the window at the wet city moving past. "Actually," she said, "it's the best night of my life." The driver nodded slowly, the way drivers do when they have heard many things in the back seat of their car and have learned that most of them are none of their business. He turned up the radio slightly. Danielle leaned her head back against the seat. The rain streaked the window beside her face. The city lights blurred and ran in the wet glass like something being written and immediately erased. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, everything would begin. Tonight, she let herself sit in the back of a white sedan in the rain and be for just a few more minutes the woman nobody had thought to worry about. The morning after Danielle left Cole, Whitfield made himself breakfast for the first time in 3 years. He stood in the kitchen in his robe and he scrambled 2 eggs and he ate them standing at the counter, and when he was done he rinsed the plate and set it in the rack and looked around the kitchen with the particular satisfaction of a man who has just rearranged something heavy and is admiring the new space where it used to be. He called Tara at 8:47. "She's gone," he said. There was a pause on the other end, brief, calibrated the pause of a woman who had been waiting for this sentence and had rehearsed how to receive it without sounding like she had been waiting for it. "How are you feeling?" Tara said. "Good," Cole said, and he meant it. That was the thing, he genuinely meant it. He stood in the kitchen of the house he had lived in for 2 years, and he felt with complete sincerity that a weight had been lifted, that the air was cleaner, that the version of his life he had been imagining for the past 8 months was now simply a matter of logistics and time. "Come over," he said. She was there by 10. Tara Simmons walked through the front door of the house for the second time. The first had been Vivian's staged visit, and this time she walked through it differently, slowly, taking inventory. She looked at the living room furniture and the kitchen appliances and the artwork on the walls with the particular attention of a woman who is calculating what stays and what goes, and what she would replace with something that felt more like herself. Cole watched her do this and felt something close to pride. They sat together at the kitchen counter, the same counter where Danielle had sat 3 nights running, working before dawn, where she had read Cole's text message and said nothing, where she had listened to her husband's footsteps on the stairs and quietly begun dismantling the life they had built together, one careful document at a time, and Cole poured 2 glasses of orange juice and talked about the future with the easy confidence of a man who had never once considered that the future might not cooperate. "The lawyer says it should be straightforward," he said. "Community property. We split everything down the middle. The house, the accounts, whatever she's got from that consulting thing she does." Tara nodded. She ran her finger along the edge of the counter. "What about her business?" she said. "DH Capital or whatever it's called." Cole waved his hand. "It's small. She never made real money from it. My lawyer will look into it, but I'm not worried." He picked up his glass. "She needs this to be clean, too. She's not going to fight." Tara looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, not doubt exactly. More like the faint, quickly suppressed instinct of a person who has just heard something that doesn't quite add up but has decided not to examine it too closely because the alternative is inconvenient. She smiled instead. "Good," she said. Vivian called at noon. Cole was in his home office on the phone with his lawyer, a man named Douglas Hale, who specialized in high-asset divorces and who had, over the course of 2 preliminary consultations, given Cole the distinct impression that this would be resolved efficiently and in his favor. He put Douglas on hold and switched to his mother. "It's done," Vivian said before he could speak. "She left last night," Cole said. His mother made a sound, not quite a sigh, not quite satisfaction, but something in the precise territory between the two. "Good," she said. "Good. Now listen to me, Cole. You need to move quickly. Get your lawyer to file the papers this week. Don't give her time to find someone better than Douglas." "I know, Mom." "And the house?" Vivian continued with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had been planning this conversation for months. "Make sure the house is protected. It's in both your names, but you've been the primary earner. Douglas should be able to argue contribution." Cole had been the primary earner. That was the phrase his mother used, the phrase Cole used, the phrase that felt to both of them like an irrefutable fact, because Danielle's income from her consulting work had always been, as far as either of them knew, modest and intermittent and entirely beneath serious consideration. "I'll handle it," Cole said. "And Cole," Vivian said, her voice dropping half a register into the tone she used when she wanted something to land firmly, "don't be generous. She had 3 years of your life and your income and your home. That's enough. Don't let Douglas talk you into a settlement that makes you look gracious. Gracious is expensive." "I won't," Cole said. He switched back to Douglas and they talked for 40 more minutes about asset division and filing timelines, and the particular legal language that would frame Danielle Hayes as a woman of limited independent means, whose primary financial support for 3 years had been her husband. Cole felt the entire time entirely reasonable. What Cole did not know, what Douglas Hale did not know, what Vivian did not know, what Tara absolutely did not know, was that 3 days before, Cole had sat his wife down at the kitchen counter and told her he wanted a divorce. He had transferred $200,000 from their joint savings account into a personal account registered solely in his name. He had done it quietly. A Tuesday afternoon online, the kind of transaction that takes 4 minutes and generates a confirmation email he had immediately deleted. He had told himself it was practical, a cushion, a head start, a reasonable precaution for a man preparing to restructure his finances. He had not told his lawyer. He had not told Tara. He had not told his mother, who would have told him it was smart. He had not considered that joint marital assets are legally protected, that unilateral transfer of marital funds prior to divorce filing constitutes dissipation of marital assets, and that depending on the jurisdiction and the intent, it can cross the line from civil dispute into criminal fraud territory. He had not considered any of this because he was a man who had never been required to consider consequences with any particular seriousness. Things had always in the end worked out for Cole Whitfield. Not because he was lucky exactly, though he was, but because the people around him had always in one way or another absorbed the cost of his carelessness. Danielle had absorbed it for 3 years. She was done absorbing. Patricia Wells found the transfer on a Thursday morning. She had been conducting a routine forensic review of the marital financial records, something she did as a matter of course when a client entered divorce proceedings. Not because she expected to find anything, but because she had been practicing family law for 26 years, and she had learned that the absence of evidence was not the same as the absence of wrongdoing. She found the transfer in 11 minutes. She sat back in her chair and looked at it for a long moment. $200,000. Moved 3 days before Cole told Danielle he wanted a divorce. Moved into an account with no paper trail connecting it to the marriage. She picked up her phone and called Danielle. "I need you to look at something," she said when Danielle answered. She sent the screenshot. Danielle opened it. She looked at the date. She looked at the amount. She looked at the account number the money had been moved into, a number she did not recognize, had never seen, had never been told existed. She was quiet for a moment. Patricia waited. She was good at waiting. "He did this 3 days before he told me," Danielle said. Her voice was not loud. It was not shaking. It was the voice of a woman doing the specific mental work of integrating new information into an existing understanding, updating the picture, sharpening the edges. "Yes," Patricia said. Another silence. "What does that mean for us?" Danielle said. Patricia set her pen down on the desk. "It means," she said carefully, "that he didn't just want to leave you. He wanted to leave you with less." A pause. "And it means we now have something that Douglas Hale is not going to be able to explain away in front of a judge." Danielle was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, "Good," she said. She said it the way her father used to say it, low, unhurried, with the particular weight of a word that means more than it sounds. Not celebration, not relief, just the quiet recognition that the equation had shifted and that the shifting was entirely in her favor. "Now we have everything we need," she said. And she hung up. Patricia Wells had an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown that had no sign on the door. Not because she was hiding, because she had never needed to advertise. In 26 years of practice, every client she had ever taken had come through a referral, one person who trusted her telling another person who needed her. The office was quiet, deliberately so. Dark wood, good chairs, a window that looked out over the city at an angle that made it feel like you were slightly above everything, which Patricia had always felt was the correct psychological position from which to conduct the kind of work she did. Danielle arrived at 9 a.m. on a Friday. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a simple white shirt, her natural hair neat, and closed the leather portfolio under her arm. She looked Patricia, thought not for the first time, like a woman who had slept well, and thought clearly, and had made her decisions before she walked through the door, which was exactly what she had done. They sat across from each other at the long table Patricia used for client meetings, and Patricia opened the file she had been building for the past 3 days, and they began. "Let's start with the prenuptial agreement," Patricia said. She slid a copy across the table. Danielle didn't pick it up. She already knew what was in it. She had read it 4 times in the week before her wedding, which was 4 more times than Cole had. "He signed it," Danielle said. "He signed it," Patricia confirmed. "On page 7, line 14, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. His signature is clear. His initials are on every page." She paused. His lawyer at the time, a man named Frederick Boone, whom Cole has since fired and replaced with Douglas Hale, did advise him to read it carefully before signing. There is a notation in the original file to that effect. "He didn't read it," Danielle said. "He did not read it," Patricia said. "Or if he did not read it with sufficient attention to understand what he was signing away. What Cole Whitfield had signed away on a warm Saturday afternoon 11 days before his wedding, in the offices of a law firm he had visited once and never returned to, was any claim, present, future, or derivative to assets established prior to the date of the marriage, assets held under entities registered prior to the date of the marriage, and any revenue appreciation or transaction proceeds arising from those entities. DH Capital Group had been registered 4 years before Danielle met Cole. The Haruki Global acquisition, the $30 billion wire that had landed in Danielle's account on the night Cole put her out in the rain, was a transaction proceeding from an entity registered prior to the marriage. Every dollar of it was hers. Entirely legally, unambiguously hers. Cole's lawyer, Douglas Hale, would find this out in Conference Room B, but that was still 10 days away. For now, Cole was still operating under the confident assumption that he was the financially superior party in this divorce, and that assumption was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. "The fraud?" Danielle said. Patricia nodded. She pulled a second document from the file, the forensic accounting summary she had completed 2 nights ago, printed on plain white paper, with nothing on the header except a date and a case number. $200,000, she said, transferred from the joint account on October 14th. 3 days before Cole told you he wanted a divorce and 11 days before he filed the preliminary papers. She slid the document across the table. Danielle looked at it. Under state law, Patricia continued unilateral dissipation of marital assets in anticipation of divorce proceedings is a civil violation. The court can order full restitution plus penalties, and it factors into the equitable distribution calculation significantly in your favor. She paused. However, Danielle looked up. The amount, the timing, and the fact that it was moved into an undisclosed account not simply spent but hidden pushes this into territory where a district attorney's office could plausibly argue criminal intent. Fraudulent transfer of marital property. That carries a potential felony charge. The room was very quiet. I'm not recommending we go that route immediately, Patricia said. I'm recommending we hold it. We present the civil violation at the divorce proceeding. We let Douglas Hale see it for the first time in that room, and we see what Cole decides to do when he understands the full scope of what he's exposed to. Danielle nodded slowly. And if he decides to fight, then we hand the forensic report to the DA's office. Patricia said simply, and we let the criminal justice system have a conversation with him that we don't need to be part of. Danielle looked at the document for another moment. Then she slid it back across the table to Patricia. Hold it, she said. Across town in the same hour, Cole Whitfield sat in Douglas Hale's conference room and felt entirely in control of his future. Douglas was a compact, efficient man who wore cufflinks and spoke in the measured cadences of someone who charged by 6-minute increments and wanted you to feel the value of every one of them. He had laid out a strategy that Cole found deeply satisfying. Aggressive asset discovery on Danielle's side, motion for equitable contribution assessment on the house, and a proposed settlement that offered Danielle a lump sum, $250,000, in exchange for a full waiver of all marital claims. It's generous, Douglas said, given that she has no demonstrable independent income above $60,000 annually. $60,000 annually. That was what Cole had told Douglas. That was what Cole believed genuinely, completely, without a shadow of doubt, because it was what he had observed and he had never thought to look further than his own observations. She'll take it, Cole said. She doesn't have the resources to fight. Douglas nodded. He clicked his pen. We'll file the full petition Monday. Discovery requests go out the same day. If her legal representation is as modest as you indicate, we should have a response timeline of 4 to 6 weeks and a resolution within 90 days. Cole leaned back in his chair. 90 days. 3 months from now, this would be finished. He would have the house. He would have his accounts. He would have the settlement on terms that cost him almost nothing. He thought about Tara. He thought about the way she had walked through the living room that morning, slow assessing already inhabiting the space. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone, "Don't be generous." He wasn't being generous. He was being smart. That was what he told himself. What he could not have known, what nothing in his experience had equipped him to imagine, was that the woman he had put out in the rain 11 days ago had not spent those 11 days crying or scrambling or searching for a lawyer who would work within her budget. She had spent them working. She had spent them in her father's house in the suburbs at the kitchen table under the lamp, going through documents with Patricia that Cole had never seen, finalizing a legal position so airtight that Douglas Hale's discovery requests would land like paper boats against a harbor wall. She had spent them making sure that when Cole Whitfield walked into Conference Room B with his cuff-linked lawyer and his 90-day timeline and his settlement offer of $250,000, he would be walking into a room that had already been arranged, every chair, every document, every silence, by someone who had been 10 moves ahead of him since the night he signed a piece of paper he had never bothered to read. He had signed every document without reading a single page. The article went live at 6:47 in the morning. It appeared first on Bloomberg's Financial Wire, a clean factual piece, 400 words, carrying the headline DH Capital Group completes $30 billion acquisition by Haruki Global in landmark biotech energy deal. By 7:15, it had been picked up by the Wall Street Journal. By 7:40, it was on Reuters. By 8 o'clock, it had migrated from the financial pages into the broader news cycle, carried along by the sheer size of the number and the particular details that made it irresistible to editors looking for a story with texture, because the number alone was remarkable. But the number attached to a name, Danielle Hayes, founder, a woman who had built DH Capital Group from a $4 million inheritance into a $30 billion acquisition target, over 10 years operating almost entirely outside the spotlight, known in certain rooms and completely invisible in others, that was something else entirely. The Bloomberg piece included a photograph. It had been taken 2 years earlier at a closed-door industry conference in Singapore. Danielle, at a podium mid-sentence, her natural hair close and neat, her expression composed and direct, the kind of expression that photographs well because it is not performing for the camera. She looked exactly like what she was, a person who had built something real and knew precisely how real it was. The caption read, Danielle Hayes, founder and CEO, DH Capital Group. Not Danielle Whitfield, Danielle Hayes. She had never changed her name professionally. Cole had asked her to once in the first year of their marriage, and she had smiled and said she would think about it and had never thought about it again. He had not pushed. He had not thought it mattered. It mattered now. Cole's phone began at 7:52. He was in the shower when the first message came through a colleague named Brett, whom he had worked with for 4 years, and who communicated almost exclusively in clipped sentences and sports metaphors. The message read, saw the Bloomberg piece. That your wife, Cole, turned off the shower. He stood in the bathroom and read the message, and then he read it again, and then he put the phone face down on the vanity and stood there for a moment with the water still running off him onto the tile. He picked the phone back up. He opened Bloomberg. He read the headline. He read it twice. He scrolled down to the photograph. He looked at the photograph for a very long time, at his wife's face on the screen of his phone, at the podium, at the caption. Founder and CEO, the conference had been in Singapore. 2 years ago. He remembered that trip. She had been gone for 4 days, had come back composed and said almost nothing about where she had been, and he had not asked because he had not considered her travel worth asking about. He set the phone down on the vanity again. He picked it up again. He read the article from the beginning slowly this time, the way you read something when you are hoping that a second reading will produce a different meaning than the first. It did not. DH Capital Group. Founder Danielle Hayes. 10 years of operation. Biotech and renewable energy infrastructure. $30 billion. Confirmed wire transfer. Largest single acquisition in the sector this calendar year. His phone vibrated again. Brett, dude. Then another colleague, Marcus Cole, is your wife Danielle Hayes, the DH Capital woman, sending you the WSJ piece. Then his director, Gerald Brooks, the same Gerald Brooks from the Meridian Hotel Gala, the man whose wife had spent 20 minutes in animated conversation with Danielle, while Cole stood beside them feeling obscurely irritated, a single message that contained no words. Just the Bloomberg link. Cole sat down on the edge of the bathtub. He called Danielle at 8:14. The phone rang 4 times. Then her voicemail, her voice calm and professional, asking him to leave a message. He did not leave a message. He called again at 8:22. Voicemail. 8:31. Voicemail. He put the phone down and sat in the bathroom for a while longer, the cold air of the room settling around him, and he thought about the prenuptial agreement he had signed 11 days before his wedding in the offices of a lawyer he had never returned to. He thought about the way Danielle had looked at him across the kitchen counter when he told her he wanted a divorce, the complete unreadable stillness of her. He thought about the single question she had asked. Are you sure? He had said absolutely. He pressed his palms flat against his knees, and he sat with the specific physical sensation of a man who has just understood something enormous and is not yet ready to know what to do with the understanding. Across town in the marketing firm's open plan office, Tara Simmons read the WSJ article on her work computer at 8:44. She read it once quickly, the way you read something you are hoping will turn out to be about someone else. It did not turn out to be about someone else. She read it a second time slowly. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the number. She looked at the name. Danielle Hayes. Not Whitfield. Hayes. She thought about Cole at the kitchen counter, orange juice in hand, waving his hand and saying she'd never made real money from it. She thought about the house, the furniture, the inventory she had taken with her eyes on that first morning, the quiet calculation of what would stay and what she would replace. She closed the browser tab. She opened it again. Read the number one more time. $30 billion. She closed the browser tab again. She sat at her desk for a long time without doing anything. Around her, the office filled up gradually, phones ringing, keyboards, the smell of coffee from the kitchen. She sat in the middle of all of it, and she thought about the very specific series of decisions that had led her to this morning, and she thought about where those decisions were pointing now, and she felt for the first time since this had all begun something she recognized as the particular cold clarity of a person recalculating in the presence of new information. She did not call Cole. She did not text him either. She picked up a pen and pulled a notepad toward her, and she wrote nothing on it. She just held the pen and sat with the silence of a decision being made quietly, The way most real decisions are made, not with drama, not with announcement, but in the space between one breath and the next, when the math finally becomes impossible to argue with. Cole called Patricia Wells at 9:03. He had found her number in Danielle's old contact list, a number he had seen on the screen of his wife's phone 100 times, without ever thinking to memorize it until this morning, when he had found it in the contacts Danielle had synced to their shared calendar and had not thought to remove. Patricia's assistant answered. "Patricia Wells's office?" "This is Cole Whitfield," he said. "I need to speak with Ms. Wells." A pause. Brief. Professional. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Cole opened his mouth, closed it, thought about how to answer a question that should have been simple and was somehow not. "It's regarding my wife," he said. "Danielle Hayes." Another pause. Longer this time. "One moment, Mr. Whitfield." He heard the line click to hold music, something low and instrumental entirely inappropriate to the situation. He sat in the bathroom in his robe and he listened to it and he waited. Then the assistant came back. "Mr. Whitfield, Ms. Wells asked me to let you know that she is expecting you." A beat. "Conference room B. Monday morning, 10 a.m. Everyone will already be inside." The line went quiet. Cole lowered the phone from his ear. He looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, the robe, the wet hair, the expression of a man standing at the exact edge of the life he had arranged for himself, looking down at what was on the other side. He had not liked what he saw. The room was already full when Cole arrived. He had dressed carefully that morning, the charcoal suit, the good tie, the shoes he reserved for important meetings in the automatic way of a man who believes that appearing composed is the same as being composed. He had told himself in the elevator ride up to the 14th floor that this was simply a procedural meeting. That whatever the Bloomberg article said, whatever the number was, the prenuptial agreement was years old and lawyers found ways around things like that every day. That Douglas Hale was good at his job, that this would be fine. The elevator opened. Patricia's assistant led him down the corridor without speaking. The carpet was dark. The ceiling lights were the kind that gave no shadows. At the end of the hall, a door stood open. Conference room B, and through it, Cole could see a long table, a row of windows overlooking the city, and the backs of several people already seated. He walked in. Danielle was at the far end of the table. She was wearing a white tailored blazer over a simple ivory blouse, her natural hair neat, and closed her hands folded on the table in front of her, with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting patiently and is entirely unbothered by how long it has taken. She did not look up when Cole entered. She was reading something a single page face up on the table with the focused, unhurried attention she brought to everything. Patricia sat to Danielle's right. Black blazer. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. A closed leather folder in front of her that Cole could not see the contents of. Douglas Hale was already there too at the near end of the table, his cufflinks catching the light. He gave Cole a small professional nod. Beside him, a junior associate Cole had never met arranged papers in a folder, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been told to stay in the background and intended to. Vivienne was at the side of the table not as legal representation, but as what she had described to Cole that morning as moral support, which Patricia had agreed to permit, with a neutrality that should have been its own warning. Cole sat down. Danielle looked up from the page she had been reading. She looked at him with an expression that was not cold, not warm, not triumphant, simply clear. The expression of a woman who has arrived at a destination she planned for and is simply present in it. She said nothing. Cole looked away first. Douglas Hale opened. He did it well. Cole had to give him that. He was organized, confident, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who had done this many times and intended to do it many more. He laid out the marital asset summary, the house, the joint accounts, Cole's salary and pension contributions, a modest investment portfolio. He presented the proposed settlement figure, $250,000, lump sum, full waiver, and framed it as generous, reasonable, the kind of offer a sensible woman would accept to avoid the time and expense of prolonged litigation. He spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. Patricia let him finish. She let the silence after his last sentence sit in the room for a full 4 seconds, long enough to be noticed, not long enough to be dramatic. Then she opened her leather folder. She did not make a speech. She did not raise her voice. She reached into the folder and removed a single sheet of paper, and she placed it in the center of the table face up, and she slid it toward Douglas Hale with the calm of a woman setting down something she has been carrying for a very long time and is entirely ready to put down. Douglas looked at it. His expression did not change immediately. Trained lawyers are good at that, the face that processes without revealing. But Cole watched him read the document, and he watched something happen behind Douglas's eyes, a recalibration swift and complete, the look of a man whose entire strategic map has just been redrawn in the space of a single paragraph. The document was the wire confirmation. Haruki Global/D H Capital Group final acquisition closing. Amount transferred $30,000, $0.00000 US. Recipient Danielle Hayes. DH Capital Group primary account. Date: October 17th. The date was the night Cole had put her out in the rain. Douglas set the paper down. He picked it up again. He set it down. This, he began, was executed, Patricia said quietly, prior to the filing of any divorce petition, under a holding entity registered 4 years before the marriage, and fully protected under the prenuptial agreement your client signed on September 6th, 3 years ago. She paused. Every dollar of it. The room was absolutely silent. Cole stared at the document. $30 billion. The number sat on the page in plain black type, and it was simply a number digits arranged in a sequence, and yet it had the physical quality of something enormous. Something that occupied space, something that had been in the room the entire time, and had simply been invisible until this moment. He thought about Danielle at the kitchen counter. The laptop closed before he came downstairs. The leather portfolio always over her shoulder. The calls she took in her office with the door closed that he had never once thought to ask about. He thought about her at the Meridian Hotel Gala 3 years ago consulting. Private sector. Mostly my own and Gerald Brooks's wife leaning in with interest while Cole stood beside them, feeling obscurely inexplicably irritated by his wife's composure. He thought about the Singapore trip. 4 days. She had come back saying almost nothing. He thought about, "Are you sure?" He had said absolutely. His jaw was very tight. He could feel it, the specific physical tension of a man trying to hold his face in a shape it no longer wanted to hold. Patricia reached into the folder again. "There is a second matter," she said. She placed a second document on the table. This one she did not slide toward Douglas. She left it in front of her and turned it so the room could read the header. Forensic Accounting Summary Marital Asset Review. On October 14th. Patricia said 3 days before Mr. Whitfield informed my client of his intention to divorce, and 11 days before he filed the preliminary petition, $200,000 was transferred from the joint marital savings account into a personal account registered solely in Mr. Whitfield's name. She looked at Douglas. "This account was not disclosed in your client's asset summary." Douglas Hale was very still. Under state statute, Patricia continued, "This constitutes unilateral dissipation of marital assets in anticipation of divorce proceedings. Civil penalties include full restitution damages and an adverse equitable distribution adjustment." A pause. "Additionally, the manner of transfer to an undisclosed account timed in direct anticipation of filing meets the threshold for criminal referral under the fraudulent transfer statute. I have prepared the referral documentation. I have not yet submitted it." The word "yet" sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Yet," Douglas repeated very quietly. "Yet," Patricia confirmed. It was Vivian who broke first. She had been sitting at the side of the table with the rigid posture of a woman who had come to witness a victory and was finding the experience unexpectedly different from what she had imagined. She had been silent through Douglas's presentation, silent through Patricia's response, silent through the $30 billion document and the forensic accounting summary. But the word "yet" and the particular quality of the silence that followed it did something to her composure that she could not entirely control. "But he said she had nothing," Vivian said. Her voice came out louder than she intended, sharp, almost bewildered, the voice of a woman who has built an entire architecture of certainty on a foundation that has just been removed. "He told me she had nothing? He told me he said..." She stopped. The room turned toward her. Patricia looked at Vivian with the patient, steady attention of a woman who has just received an unexpected gift and is choosing not to react to it visibly. Vivian understood in the sudden awful clarity of the moment that she had just said something in front of a room full of lawyers that she could not unsay. That he told me she had nothing spoken in this room on this morning, in the context of a financial fraud investigation, was not moral support. It was testimony. She pressed her lips together, folded her hands in her lap, looked at the table. Cole did not look at his mother. Danielle stood. She did it quietly, without ceremony. She picked up the single page she had been reading when Cole walked in the wire confirmation, her copy, and she slid it back into her portfolio. She buttoned the single button on her white blazer. She looked at Patricia, who gave the smallest nod. Then she looked at the room. Not at Cole specifically. At the room at the table and the windows and the city beyond them, 14 floors up the whole of it laid out in the morning light, like something she had earned the right to see clearly. She did not make a speech. She did not address Cole. She did not say anything to Vivienne. She did not look at Douglas Hale's face, which had acquired the particular gray quality of a man reassessing his fee structure. She picked up her portfolio. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she stopped not to look back, but simply because the moment required a beat of stillness before it could properly end. "I think we're done here," she said, and she walked out. Collapse does not always look like what you expect. It is not always loud. It is not always sudden. It does not always arrive like a building coming down the cinematic version, dust and debris and the dramatic finality of something enormous hitting the ground all at once. Sometimes collapse is quieter than that. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting in a rented apartment on a Tuesday evening with the overhead light on and a laptop open on the coffee table and nothing in the refrigerator except a bottle of water and a takeout container he had not thrown away yet. Sometimes it looks exactly like Cole Whitfield at 9:43 p.m., 3 weeks after Conference Room B. The job had gone first. Not immediately. These things never happen immediately because institutions move slowly and carefully and always want to appear to have conducted a thorough review before acting. But the internal audit committee at Cole's firm had been notified of the forensic accounting findings as part of the divorce discovery process, which was standard procedure, and the review that followed had taken 11 business days and had produced a finding that Douglas Hale had privately told Cole to prepare for before it arrived. The finding was that Cole Whitfield had on 3 separate occasions over the previous 18 months used a corporate expense account to subsidize personal travel that upon review corresponded precisely with dates when he had been with Tara Simmons in cities where neither of them had professional obligations. The amounts were not enormous, $4,300 total spread across 3 trips, the kind of figure that might have gone unnoticed indefinitely in a company that wasn't already looking. They had been looking. He was placed on administrative leave pending a full review on a Thursday morning. His access badge stopped working at noon. His assistant, a young man named Kevin who had worked for him for 2 years, and whom Cole had never particularly noticed, as a person sent him an email that afternoon to confirm the forwarding address for his mail, and the email was professional and thorough, and contained not a single word beyond what was necessary, and Cole had stared at it for a long time because it was exactly the kind of email you send to someone you are not expecting to come back. He had not gone back. Tara's withdrawal was not dramatic either. That was the thing Cole had not anticipated, not the withdrawal itself, which some part of him had seen coming from the morning she read the Bloomberg article, but the manner of it. He had expected a conversation. He had expected at minimum an acknowledgement that something was ending a scene of some kind, the kind of scene that would have given the ending a shape he could hold in his hands and examine later. He got a text message. It came on a Saturday, 8 days after Conference Room B at 2:17 in the afternoon. He had been at the rented apartment for 5 days by then, a furnished 1-bedroom in a building that smelled faintly of other people's cooking, which he had signed a 3-month lease on because Douglas Hale had advised him to establish a separate residence immediately. The text read, "I think we both know this isn't working anymore. I'm sorry, Cole. I hope things get easier for you." He read it standing at the kitchen counter of the rented apartment with a cup of coffee he had made badly because he was still learning the machine. "I hope things get easier for you." He put the phone face down on the counter. He stood there for a long time without moving. He did not text back. Not because he had nothing to say. He had many things he wanted to say, a whole architecture of grievance and accusation, and the particular wounded fury of a man who has just realized that the person he had chosen as his proof of worth had been performing a calculation the entire time and had simply reached the end of it. But he did not say any of it. Because some part of him, the part that was still capable of honesty, however uncomfortable, recognized that Tara Simmons had looked at him across a kitchen counter 3 weeks ago and seen in the number $30 billion exactly what she had always been looking at him for. And when the math changed, she had simply updated her position. He had done the same thing. He simply had not expected it to be done back to him. He picked up his coffee, he drank it. It was bad. His mother called every day for the first week. The calls were long and full of the particular energy of a woman who has invested significantly in a narrative and is refusing to accept its revision. Vivienne had a version of events that she returned to repeatedly, a version in which Cole had been deceived, in which Danielle had hidden her wealth deliberately and maliciously, in which the prenuptial agreement was fundamentally unfair and surely challengeable, in which Patricia Wells was the villain of the story, and Douglas Hale had simply not fought hard enough. Cole listened. He said very little. He said, "I know, Mom, and we'll see, and I'm handling it." And none of those things were true in any meaningful sense, but they were the words that ended the calls most efficiently. And he had discovered in the wreckage of the past 3 weeks that efficiency was the only thing he had the energy for. In the second week, the calls came less frequently. By the third week, she called every other day. The calls were shorter. The narrative she returned to had begun to lose its insistence, not because Vivian had accepted a new version of events, but because she was a practical woman at her core, and practical women eventually redirect their energy towards situations they can still influence. Cole had become a situation she could not influence. She did not say this. But he heard it in the shortening of the calls and the slight shift in her voice from managing to simply checking in, and he understood it with the particular clarity of a son who has spent his whole life being managed by the woman who loved him most and is only now in the quiet of a rented apartment, beginning to understand what that had cost him. On a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after Conference Room B, Cole opened his laptop. He had been avoiding the internet, specifically the financial pages, specifically the search results for DH Capital Group, in the reflexive, useless way that people avoid things they know they will eventually have to look at. But it was Wednesday evening and the apartment was very quiet, and he had eaten dinner alone at the counter, and there was nothing left to avoid doing. He typed Danielle Hayes into the search bar. The results loaded. The Bloomberg piece was still near the top. The original article, the photograph founder and CEO. Below it, newer pieces, an interview Danielle had given to the Financial Times, measured and precise, discussing DH Capital's philosophy and her plans post-acquisition. A profile in a business magazine, a full page, the kind of coverage that arrives only when an editor has decided a story is worth the space. A brief item from a philanthropy newsletter. He clicked on the newsletter item. It was 3 paragraphs. The headline read, DH Capital founder Danielle Hayes pledges $500 million to National Childhood Nutrition Initiative. $500 million to childhood nutrition programs. He read the 3 paragraphs. They were straightforward, the amount the organizations involved, the stated intention. Danielle was quoted once briefly in the final paragraph. The quote was not about the money. It was about her father and something he had believed about the relationship between patience and impact, and how she hoped the work would carry forward in the spirit he had intended. Cole read the quote twice. He sat back in his chair. Outside the apartment window, the city moved through its ordinary Wednesday evening traffic, a distant siren, the specific low hum of a place that does not pause for individual reckonings. He sat inside it, and he looked at the photograph beside the newsletter article Danielle. At some event, a podium again, the same composed and direct expression, and he looked at her for a long time. He thought about the hydrangeas, the ones she had dug up herself from her father's garden and carried in the back of a rental truck because she could not leave them behind. They were still in the backyard of the house, his house now under the terms of the settlement which Douglas Hale had negotiated into something significantly less favorable than originally proposed. The hydrangeas were in the backyard, and he had not watered them since she left, and he did not know if they needed watering or what season they were supposed to bloom in, or any of the small specific knowledge a person accumulates about a living thing they tend to. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of the rented apartment, and he looked at the wall. He did not open the laptop again that night. The house was exactly as she remembered it. That was the first thing Danielle noticed when she turned onto her father's street, that nothing had changed, that the suburb moved at the same unhurried pace it always had, that the oak trees lining the pavement had lost a few more leaves since October, but were otherwise exactly as she had left them. The neighbor's porch light was on, as it always was in the evenings. The mailbox at the corner still leaned slightly to the left, the way it had leaned since she was 12 years old, and her father had straightened it twice and eventually concluded that it simply preferred that angle. She pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. Not because she was hesitating, not because the house held anything difficult. It held the opposite of difficult, which was its own kind of thing to walk into when you had been moving at the speed she had been moving for the past 6 weeks. She sat in the car and let the engine go quiet, and she listened to the suburb settle around her, a dog somewhere, a television through someone's window, the specific soft silence of a neighborhood that goes to sleep early and wakes up the same way, and she breathed. Then she got out. She had been staying in a hotel for the past month, a good one, quite the kind of place where the staff learned your name quickly and left you alone with equivalent speed. She had worked from there mostly. The post-acquisition transition with Haruki's integration team required her presence in a series of meetings that were long and detailed and technically demanding, and she had moved through them with the focused energy of someone who has recently set down a very heavy thing and discovered with some surprise how much capacity she had been reserving all along without knowing it. The divorce had been finalized on a Friday. Patricia had called her at 4:17 in the afternoon. "It's done." she had said without preamble, because that was how Patricia Wells communicated the end of things cleanly, directly, without ceremony, that hadn't been earned. Everything per the settlement. The house reverts to Cole. Your accounts are fully separated. The prenuptial protections are confirmed on record. DH Capital is untouched. The fraud finding, Danielle had said. He repaid the $200,000 plus penalties. The DA's office accepted the civil resolution in lieu of criminal referral. A pause. He kept his freedom. He lost almost everything else. Danielle had been standing at the hotel window when the call came, looking out at the city, the afternoon light coming in, at a low angle, the kind of October light that makes everything look both sharp and slightly melancholy at the same time. She had listened to Patricia's summary and she had felt not triumph, not relief exactly, but something she could only describe as the particular stillness that follows the end of a long and effortful thing, the stillness of a runner who has crossed a finish line and has not yet decided to stop moving. "Thank you, Patricia," she had said. "Go rest," Patricia had said. "You've earned it." She had not rested. Not immediately. There were 3 more calls that afternoon, 2 the following morning, a document review that took most of Saturday. But she had thought about her father's house, the kitchen table, the lamp, the garden in November, and she had decided that when the week was done, she would go back there for a few days. Not to work. Just to be in the place where she had first understood what she was capable of before the world had opinions about it. The key still worked. She pushed the door open and stood in the entryway. The house smelled the same old wood and the faint ghost of the coffee her father used to make every morning, which was impossible because he had been gone for 10 years, and the coffee smell was surely only in her memory now. But some things are so deeply encoded in a place that they outlast logic. She set her bag by the door. She did not turn on the overhead light. She turned on the lamp in the kitchen, the small one above the counter, the one her father had used on working evenings, the one she had used on the mornings she had come here after DH Capital began, and she needed the particular quality of thought that only this table produced. The lamp came on, and the kitchen filled with that specific warm circle of light, and the rest of the house stayed dark around it, and Danielle stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table. Her father's chair, the same one. The wood worn in the places where he had rested his arms for 30 years. She went and put the kettle on. Patricia called at 8:47. Danielle was sitting on the back steps with a mug of tea looking at the garden. November had been gentle this year. The hydrangeas she had left behind when she and Cole had bought their house were still holding their shape. The dried flower heads pale against the dark soil, the kind of quiet persistence that plants manage without effort or intention. She had not taken those hydrangeas. She had taken the ones from her father's garden, and those were now in a backyard belonging to Cole Whitfield, and she found looking at the ones still here that she felt entirely at peace with that arrangement. Some things you carry forward. Some things you leave behind. The difference between them is not always obvious until you are standing on the other side of a door that has closed. She answered the phone. "Just checking in," Patricia said. Which was not something Patricia Wells said. She did not make social calls, did not check in without reason. But she made an exception for Danielle occasionally in the way that certain professional relationships accumulate enough history to quietly become something more than professional without either party needing to name it. "I'm at my father's house," Danielle said. A pause. "Good," Patricia said. The same word Danielle used, the same weight. "I'm sitting in the garden," Danielle said. "The hydrangeas are still here." "Of course they are," Patricia said. "They're yours." They talked for a few minutes, nothing urgent, nothing that needed deciding. Patricia mentioned a speaking invitation that had come in from a financial conference in Geneva. Danielle said she would think about it. Patricia said she would send the details. There was a comfortable brevity to the conversation, the ease of 2 people who have been through something difficult together and have arrived together on the other side. "Rest," Patricia said again before she hung up. "I am," Danielle said, and meant it. She sat on the steps for a long time after the call ended. The night was cool and clear, the kind of November evening that smells of turned soil and coming cold, where the sky above the suburb is dark enough to show a few stars between the orange wash of the streetlights. She held the mug in both hands, and she let the warmth of it move through her palms, and she did not think about Haruki or the integration timeline, or Geneva or Douglas Hale, or the rented apartment where Cole was sitting tonight with his laptop closed. She thought about her father. She thought about him at this table on a Sunday evening in this light with a printed page and a cup of tea gone cold, and the patient, unhurried voice of a man who understood that the most important things take a very long time, and that this is not a problem, it is simply the nature of important things. She thought about what he had built and what she had built from what he left her, and what she intended to build from here. She looked down at her hands around the mug. The left hand. The ring finger. The ring had been gone for 6 weeks, removed, quietly placed in the bottom of the leather portfolio, handed to Patricia at their first post-divorce meeting without ceremony or explanation, because there was no ceremony or explanation required. Patricia had accepted it the way she accepted everything, without comment, efficiently, with the steady competence of a woman who understood that some things simply needed to be received and taken care of. But there was still a mark, a faint indentation at the base of the finger, the skin slightly smoother there, the ghost of 3 years of a weight she had carried and had now put down. She ran her thumb across it slowly, the small, almost invisible evidence of something that had been and was no longer. She did not feel grief about it. She did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter and more durable than either of those things, the particular piece of a woman who has walked a long way through difficult terrain and has arrived finally at a place she recognizes. She was home. Not because this house was the destination, not because she would stay here forever, or because the work was done, or because she had reached some final resting point beyond which no more effort was required, but because she was here tonight in the garden her father had planted in the light he had worked under, holding a mug of tea in hands that had built something worth $30 billion, and had not once in the building of it lost sight of what it was actually for. She rubbed her thumb once more across the faint mark on her finger. Then she let her hand rest open against her knee, and she looked up at the sky. There is a kind of strength the world does not recognize until it has no choice. Not the strength that announces itself, not the raised voice, not the dramatic gesture, not the public declaration of worth that demands to be witnessed, but the other kind. The kind that works in the dark before dawn, in the quiet of a kitchen with a lamp on and a laptop open, and a cup of coffee made for no one but herself. The kind that observes and waits and builds slowly, methodically, without requiring anyone's permission or anyone's belief. Danielle Hayes was never invisible. She was simply seen by the wrong people for a very long time. The men and women who underestimate quiet people make a specific error. They confuse silence for emptiness. They look at a person who does not argue and decide she has nothing to argue with. They look at a woman who does not perform her worth and conclude she has none. They build their confidence on the foundation of her restraint, not understanding that restraint exercised long enough by the right person becomes something structural, something load-bearing, something that when it is finally removed brings the whole constructed certainty down. What Cole Whitfield lost was not just a marriage. He lost the story he had told himself about what success looks like and who deserves it and how the world is arranged. That story had kept him comfortable for a long time. It had also kept him blind. Danielle had not set out to teach him anything. That was perhaps the most important part. She had not stayed quiet for 3 years in order to orchestrate a lesson. She had stayed quiet because she was doing the work, and the work required her full attention, and she had long since made peace with the fact that not everyone in her life would understand what the work was. Some people will only see your value on the day the number appears on a screen in front of them. You do not need those people to see you earlier. You only need to know what you are building and why and for whom. Build it anyway. Build it in the quiet. Build it in the early mornings and the late evenings and the 4-second pauses before you move. Build it with the patience your father taught you, or your mother, or the version of yourself that survived something difficult and came out on the other side still standing. And when the moment comes, when the door closes and the rain falls and the number arrives in your inbox at 9:47 on the worst night they thought they were giving you, walk forward. Don't look back. You never needed to.